As far as I'm concerned, my actions are wholly justified. To me, this rationalizes everything I intend on doing, and this is my justification for all of it. Color me a dissident to the structure of power on the internet. Allow me to elucidate exactly why I find things disagreeable. Since the earliest days of the World Wide Web, the way the internet power has always worked is quite simple. You found a website, you create it, write some interactive code for it, and then throw it up on the web. You get to be its dictator, benevolent or malevolent, and this question of whether you're its malevolent or benevolent dictator is ultimately irrelevant. But this kind of power is not derived from the consent of the governed. All of us internet users being the governed, there is no democracy in the power structure of the World Wide Web. I would hold that power that is legitimate can only rightfully be derived from the consent of the governed, which means that it has to be elected in democratic elections, you know. And yet, this is not how things work on web domains. If you own a domain, you get to be your power over it is essentially that of a god over it. The same with a subreddit, as it is in this case. You know, you get to be god of it, and all of your mods are going to be hereby appointed, but your discretion. This kind of absolute power almost always pretty much always corrupts, but worse, even some of it always does. Subreddits end up taking over by moderation teams that make lists of rules but allow them to be broken by the old guard, as in the oldest users, that is allowed to break rules against abusive comments, etc., and engage in flagrant favoritism towards the old guard, which is almost always tolerated by the assholes in charge of the joint in hazing the noobs. But banhammer him if he hazes back in self defense. The whole culture of the web is essentially that of a gigantic college fraternity, complete with hazing rituals towards newcomers and all, such that a post like the one that I've been linking have to face the wrath of my older frat members in this, but basically the expectation by those in charge is that as a newcomer, I simply take this abuse and behave cordially towards it. In other words, the mods engage in selective enforcement and favoritism towards the old guard, who's allowed to break the rules in order to haze anyone who tries to join. I mean, it's true, fellas. You've probably witnessed a lot of this yourself. The way things work online, joining new communities is almost always like trying to join a university fraternity that embraces hazing, while the university staff ignores the problem and looks the other way. In other words, it's transparently obvious that the ban hammer only came down in my head because I'm relatively new to the group compared to those who engaged in this blood sport of bullying the newcomer. And the mods, they look the other way. There can be no appeal when people are playing it by the ear and letting their emotions guide the way that they moderate, and essentially only bothering to enforce the rules against newcomers. I'm expected to just suck it up and tolerate the fact that completely arbitrary enforcement decisions were made, and the ones that were not even handed. Other users broke the exact same rule and were not even disciplined. There's no way to argue with that except with doxing and mail bombs, hacking and violence. I'm doing what I'm doing because I'm sick of it. Why should I just sit here? And I'm not going to just sit here and passively accept this shit anymore. I'm not going to sit down and let the mods shove this wired dick up my anus. I've got a big stick too in the form of my skills, and if they won't give me even enforcement, I'm going to use it, by God, because it's the only justice I get to have, the only appeal I get to have here in the world of cyberspace. Is the punishment that is delivered by my own hand. Does that take it too far in your eyes? Well, guess what? What else was there left to me when the mods are engaging in blatant and flagrant favoritism and have essentially allowed and tolerated this kind of atmosphere where their old guard gets to haze the newcomers and they don't get disciplined for it ever. They break the same rules and they get away with it, and that's been essentially creating an atmosphere of trying to join a college fraternity in cyberspace. The only voice we're left with is taking it too far by doxing to push back and veto objectionable decisions made by our tech overlords. Don't blame me. They didn't give me a valid alternative to truly independent authorities to overrule to and overrule, and appeal to truly independent authorities and overrule their shitty decisions. It's their fault. I wouldn't be going down this dark path if there were legitimate ways to overrule the crappy decisions made by some Reddit mods. You know, they made rules. They should enforce them evenly on everybody. But that's not how anything works now, is it? You know, certain users, and it's usually the people who have been there the longest, get to flagrantly break the rules. Yet why the rest of us, who try to join, are expected to just take it and sop it up and cope. Well, I've had enough. I'm pulling this wired dick out of my, you know, and I'm going to force feed it to them at this point. I'm fucking tired of it. I'm done. You know, you all of this to say that this entire rotting edifice is one of completely unjust power. You know, it's never been just. It's all based on this proprietarian lunacy, where it's like a man should be, king of his castle, is the thinking that went into this. So, you own a website, it belongs to you, so you get to, impose your own structure and order on it, and that's apparently the logic. It's this libertarian proprietarian lunacy that, ultimately justified all of this. And this isn't working for, you know, much of any of us anymore. It's not. I mean, I can't. It gets to the point where it's hard, for instance, to even find niche communities to discuss geek topics, because if I try to join them, I'm gonna be confronted with a brick wall of this kind of let's haze the newcomer, and I have to get through it before they'll accept me into their little, clique. It's so fucking stupid at everything, to the point in which, all that's left is to basically impale the gladiator in this case. You haven't really given me any valid alternatives if I find, that I want the redress of a grievance. You haven't done that. That the thing about our government, is at least we have a voice in it. At least we are able to vote on the people that are, going to make the laws that we live under. But the rules in cyberspace, they thunder down from above as if they came from Moses and it was the Ten Commandments that came down from a higher power. Only we know that these are not the rules of a higher power, but the rules of men, in these subreddits, but it's the same thing, in a big way. It thunders down from above. It doesn't flow from the grassroots up to decisions, made by the users about what the rules should be in the communities that we see in cyberspace. So, and not only does that happen, but moderator discretion is, and discretionary authority is allowed in these communities, so you don't see even-handed enforcement. It's like they're afraid that it would harm the community to actually discipline the old guard the same way. But fuck the community and what's for the greater good of it. I don't care. I really don't care. It's not fair, and the people that are the old guard, should not be allowed to haze newcomers in this kind of fashion. They shouldn't be allowed to bully new people, and if they break that rule, they should face the same consequences I did if I broke it. I'm so fucking done with everything. Like, honestly, I used to share the rest of you's perspective about, going all the way towards, tearing down somebody's illusion of anonymity and everything, and making it very clear where they lived. I used to believe that was beyond the pale, but I don't anymore. And I don't anymore because, like I said, I mean, there's no way to argue with the power structure in here. There's nowhere that I can go to appeal a shitty decision that's made by them. It's imposed by a group of people whose authority is uh, is about as legitimate as an unelected person trying to put you through citizen's arrest. It's a fucking kangaroo court that has convicted me. None of this is at all legitimate. None of it. The mods of that community were appointed by the person who first pounded it. They were not. They didn't get elected from the grassroots up by the membership of that community. No, that's not how any of it works. How is any of this just? How is any of it fair? You know, and I'm left with no way to argue or appeal their shitty decisions, their favoritism, their games of a selective enforcement. None of that. I have no way at all to argue with that except to terrorize them with doxing. You've eliminated. You've not provided in the first place legitimate paths to go forward with the redress of grievances, and so the only things that are left are things that are seen as illegitimate.